Good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing well today. We'll get started in just a few minutes. If you have any questions, just add them to the comment area. Got quite a few questions this week. Morning. Okay. Morning. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Uh, Good morning, everyone. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein, and welcome to August. This is the 21st, lucky 21 installment of my weekly virtual office hour address. And, people continue to say that they appreciate these weekly, meetings and, whether or not they watch them live or watch them later in the week. So I'll continue to do them through the shelter in place and probably a lot longer. Definitely the shelter in place looks like it's going to last for a while. So that's really important. These Facebook Live events give me a chance to meet with you weekly and just give you some updates, answer some questions, and of course, give you some words of encouragement. From my standpoint, thank you for allowing me to continue to represent you, all of Sunnyvale, and work for Sunnyvale for the best I can do, during these difficult, extraordinary, weird times to say the least. This new normal is very difficult. I'm hoping that everyone's staying, healthy, both physically and mentally. It's not easy. It's not an easy time, and definitely even the governor was talking about fatigue earlier this week. But we'll get back to that a little bit later. Keep following the county health order. Remember that you can do your part to help stop the spread of the virus. Wash your hands, don't touch your face, reduce the number of people that you come in contact with on a daily basis, going out for essential items, and, just maintaining safe social distancing when you're out. And of course, most importantly, wear your face mask it really does help. It's mandatory, and there's we'll talk a little bit about that, but it's important that if you're coming in contact with people that are outside of your bubble, having a face mask on is good for you, and it's good for them. And doing whatever you can to protect others and protect yourself is critical right now. As I said before, if you need a face covering, definitely feel free to reach out to me. There's neighbors that are sewing them. There are people donating, masks that have been, that are disposable. And as much as I don't like those as much, most people can get by with a hand sewn mask, and just getting into the habit of when you come home, wash your hands, wash your mask in warm water, and hang it out to dry. That's why everybody should have 2 masks as much as possible. And I've also, there's actually something put out by the state earlier this week about people wearing face shields. Face shields should only be worn in conjunction with a face covering, so a face mask or a face covering. That's really important. It's like if you sneeze, the face shield conceivably moves up, and there's a lot more openness as far as reaching your nose, reaching your mouth, and so the face shield is good for eyes, but it needs to be actually done in conjunction with a face mask or face covering. And so yeah, the face shield, I've heard complaints, I've seen things on Nextdoor about people that from being out only wearing a face shield, and that really, it doesn't protect you that much or protect other people around you. So definitely, we're not out of the woods yet. Doing regular good protocol, wearing your face mask when you're out, wherever you are, and especially if you're inside of any business, it's mandatory. If you're on a walk, for me, I always have mine with me on my morning runs, and if I have to stop and immediately put the face mask on, if anybody's within that 6 feet. So please be careful when visiting, especially those that are at high health risk. It's critical. I keep hearing about more and more people that have been exposed or being tested positive. I just heard this week about someone in my family that's conceivably positive, and so it's not easy, and there are a lot of people dying from COVID-19. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that more later. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. We're now 143 days after the March 16th public health order that started this whole shelter in place and to slow that spread of COVID-19. And since that declaration, a lot has happened. A lot happens every day. I have daily conference calls and press conferences to watch, to confer, to advocate on your behalf. And I really understand that there's kind of information overload and fatigue, but I'm hoping that these office hours kind of help you through some of that. Let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about what's happened at the federal, the state, the county level, the city level over the last week. Last Friday night, so something fun for once. In a little bit of normalcy, Sweet Sicily, which I mentioned last week, opened in downtown Sunnyvale in the old Il Postale location along Murphy Avenue. And so it was great to see the people who showed up, and it was a lot of friends and family, a lot of Italian being spoken. The owners are actually from Sicily and from Palermo, and I only tried the desserts that night, but they have great desserts, and so it's great to have a bakery in downtown Sunnyvale again. I've heard from people that have tried it and have enjoyed their Italian lunch and dinner that's there. So they have salads and pastas and pizza. So give them a try if you get a chance. But it's nice to go to the first ribbon cutting in the middle of a pandemic. It was all safely distanced and everybody wearing masks, except for when I was actually having my speech, but everyone around me was wearing a mask and being able to talk a little bit. But it's good to see businesses actually opening up, and they the Sicilian family actually already had a location in Gilroy, and so they're actually expanding during COVID-19, which is a great thing. And then on another nice thing on Monday, and I mentioned this last week, Sunnyvale Community Services had its final backpack to school distribution day. So thanks to all the volunteers, the numerous donors that make this possible every year. I'm really happy to donate and publicize this. The children, are receiving multiple things, and that's really good. It's like it's the backpack itself, it's the school supplies, it's a shoe gift card, and extra food for the summer for their family. So it was all drive-through event this year, so slightly different than normal, but thanks to everyone in the community that makes this happen every year. Google, LinkedIn, lots of the tech companies actually donated, but a lot of residents donate every year, and there are a lot of matching donations by some of the bigger companies. So glad to see, even under COVID-19, they were able to have that event. And it's one of the things that makes me proud of Sunnyvale, that every year we come together to try to help children who need a leg up in their success for the school year. So it was actually really good from that standpoint. And I dropped by both weeks for a little bit, and it was great to see lots of families waiting in line, in their cars to pick up these goods for the kids. So that's fantastic. On Monday, and this is what I talked about earlier, Governor Newsom had his press conference, and he's and there's been a little bit of fatigue in general, and Governor Newsom kind of talked about that fatigue. It's been a long summer. It's been a long time sheltering in place, and we kind of have a middle ground approach compared to some states. There are a few states that have very little control and very little restrictions. Florida and Georgia, which don't even require masks, and then there are a few states, New York and New Jersey, which are actually quarantining visitors from areas with significant outbreaks when they come in. So it's like that. So we're somewhere in between as far as that's concerned. But initially, the governor was having press conferences every day or every other day, and they were being watched by a lot of people, and that's kind of tapered off. But and so there's an ongoing fatigue, and we're seeing that with the number of people wearing masks. I know of people having parties without face masks, without social distancing, and it's a little disheartening, when we're seeing a surge in cases during the summer. And from that standpoint, it's like, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the issues that we've heard about in the last week, but you need to be safe. This is the new normal for a while until we have a vaccine, and trying to make sure that you're not infecting yourself, infecting your loved ones or anyone else is really important, or getting infected. So the governor understands that, and having very succinct social media and push for what the measures are is critical. There are even more counties on the state watch list, and now all the counties in the Bay Area are on that watch list. And so some, San Mateo was one of the last holdouts, and now they've backed out to the state measures because they're now on one of the counties that are being watched very closely. So that, I don't know if there's a solution. People are feeling that fatigue, and that was one of the things that I posted about. There's a mental stress of just not being able to interact with people in a normal way, and it's not easy. If people have issues, there's places that you can go to help. If you want to, reach out to me, and do whatever we can do. Reach out to your friends, reach out to your neighbors, making sure that you're okay as well as they're okay. This has been very isolating, especially for single people during the shelter in place, and it's difficult, but we'll make it through. These are difficult times for everyone, but definitely we will make it through. So hopefully everyone's feeling fine, and even the governor reflected that in his press conference. On Tuesday, on an update to the Caltrain funding battle, it seems to be resolved, and so there were some negotiations, and we've talked about this for several weeks now. There was a proposal earlier, about a month ago, that there'd be a ballot measure for a 1/8 cent sales tax for Santa Clara, San Mateo, and San Francisco counties to make sure that there's long-term funding for Caltrain. And Caltrain is one of the better transportation systems that we have. From at least pre-COVID time, it had about a 70% fare box return. So 70% of their operating costs were completely being covered by the fees of those people buying tickets on a daily basis or monthly basis. During COVID, of course, public transportation across the nation has dropped, by 95%. It's down to a small percentage, and so they've already had, fiscal issues. But for the long-term operation, in order to, as we do electrification, adding more trains, adding more, personnel in order to run those trains, they needed a dedicated funding source. And BART has a funding source. VTA has a long-term funding source from sales tax. It was important that Caltrain had that. There was issues with governance however, that have been long-time issues, and there's been issues that San Mateo County has, let's say, more decision-making authority about Caltrain than Santa Clara and San Francisco. And there's been proposals, but they've been kind of not dealt with. And one of the things that before Santa Clara and San Francisco committed sales tax dollars for their residents to Caltrain, they wanted to make sure those governance issues were going to be resolved. So, in a positive measure, in dealing at the Caltrain board level, they made some commitments as far as fixing those governance issues and making sure that Caltrain is better governed evenly between all three counties. So that was kind of the sticking point. If we talked about last week, San Francisco County Board of Supervisors basically added some provisions to the original 1/8 cent sales tax, which polled really well amongst residents across the three counties. That would have probably made sure that county measure failed. And so now on Tuesday, the Santa Clara Board of Supervisors unanimously approved the Klein measure that will basically do a 1/8 cent sales tax for Santa Clara County. And San Francisco Board of Supervisors will be doing the same thing today. But it's all basically important that the Klein measure gets on, the similar measure gets in all three counties. And then ultimately what this will do is they'll go back and finalize what the negotiated governance changes will be. But that's important that Klein bill goes forward, and from my standpoint, it'll be about 108 million annually for Caltrain that allow them to expand their services, add those additional trains, and as we're coming back from COVID, making sure that we have bullet trains more often here in Sunnyvale. And had been doing a lot of advocating, trying to get bullet trains here, and it was always, well, wait until electrification. So that will be critical. It would have trains coming every 15 minutes to Sunnyvale in each direction, which during the peak hours, which would be fantastic. So, I'm glad to see that goes forward. Now, once all three Board of Supervisors put it on the ballot for November, then it'll be trying to get the word out that how important this is to our community. So that will just be, that'll be the next step. First it needs to be approved by all three Board of Supervisors, and then starts basically the advocacy to make sure that measure passes from a county level. And then on Wednesday there were several announcements about CalReady, and this was done by our county, and the state did some response CalReady is basically the conglomeration of all the testing results, and all the dashboard data that you see on the county website. Actually, some of it, as far as hospitalization, is directly is directly received from the hospitals, especially death count. But a lot of the COVID-19 testing results all go, you do your test, the testing results go to this CalReady system at the state level, and then that data is accessible by the different counties. Well, that hasn't been, over the last 2 weeks, there's been, I'll say, some ongoing electronic system issues. And so that has made some of the tracking of the COVID-19 case data very difficult. And, that delay and how those tests are reported back to the counties is difficult, for one thing, because all the tracking and all the tracking is done on 7-day and 14-day delays. And we'll talk about our numbers a little bit later, but when we're starting to look at what the trends are, those trends didn't seem actually reasonable a week ago. It seemed like we had a dip when, ultimately it was probably a steady state, or maybe an uptick. And, it was also more importantly blocking the county from doing tracing. So if it's not getting the results, if it's taking you, and it was 2 to 4, and I've heard as bad as 5 to 7 days on average to get those test cases back, then what happens as far as the county tracking and tracing who you come in contact with in the previous 7 days after you finally got your test results, as well as the 7 days before that. So it makes it that much more of a difficult effort as far as tracing is concerned. So, the dependence on this data is critical, and the county and the state is working on trying to make sure that is fixed as quickly as possible, whatever those delays are. But now I think we'll definitely see a surge as we start getting some of the test results. And we normally look at what our trends are based upon what the day of the test is, not in when we get the results in. That being said, if it's taking 7 days or more to get some of these results, it's not good for anyone. So it hinders the ability to conduct valid tracing and case investigations to slow the spread of COVID-19, to make sure that those people that you've come in contact with, if you've tested positive, are also getting tested. So the death rates are supposedly accurate, but it's a lot of this is based upon what we see from a test result standpoint. So hopefully that will be fixed soon, but definitely we've been relying on this data for a long time now, and to start seeing glitches in the system isn't good for anyone. And from a U.S. standpoint, the cases continue to go up. The cumulative cumulative number of cases on a nationwide basis is 4.8 million, and the CDC listed yesterday that there was 157,000 people that have had COVID-19. So that is, and just to put that into perspective, that is about, and it's just over the population, and the population of Sunnyvale, hopefully we'll get the census soon, is somewhere between 152 to 155,000 people. So it's basically the population of our city has now died from COVID-19, and that's, to me, that's very sobering. It's showing how people are still being affected, and how those numbers continue to go up around the county, around the state, around the nation. So it is a very difficult time, and people continue to be infected, young and old, and we're seeing an uptick on, and especially younger people getting COVID-19. And so whatever you can do to stop the spread of the virus is really important. So I wanted to talk about some upcoming items. So that was kind of what's been happening at a week standpoint. I want to talk about some upcoming items from the council and from the city standpoint. On August 11th, starting at 6:30 p.m., the City Council will be making decisions on 5 different downtown projects. And so that'll be 6:30 this Tuesday. That has to do with the Plaza del Sol Phase 2. So the Phase 2 design for Plaza del Sol across from the Caltrain station will be approved by council, and there's a lot of outreach done in the fall, and then the design, basically the developer, the consultants working with city staff finalize that design, and so that will be coming back. That was just released yesterday, so if you want to take a look at what those designs are, I'll put links into the chat later. And then several downtown specific plans items, the downtown parking policies, updates to the downtown specific plan in the EIR, and then development agreements for 2 different projects. One is STC Ventures, which is the City Line project, and then the old Kasich Minkoff developers, which is the old post office site. So there's a lot of efforts going on, improving how downtown looks like. A lot of that, from the downtown specific plan, talks about what the ratios are for office space, for housing, for retail, and then the parking, where parking is, what the parking numbers need to be. So hopefully if you have, there's a lot of documentation out there, and I mentioned it before, but definitely take a look at those, write letters to council, show up to talk at the Zoom meeting if you want. And and actually on that council meeting also at 5 p.m. we'll be having a study session to talk about the Moffett Park specific plan update. So that's looking at changing what the office ratio and conceivably adding housing and retail in Moffett Park, creating more green space. All of that is part of that Moffett Park specific plan update. So you can join at 5 p.m. if you want to do that. And then earlier this week, we announced the next in our community listening events. So our next community event will be August 24th, and it'll be an LGBTQ plus dialogue and a panel discussion. And so we're hosting these series of listening events to understand community concerns. And a lot of this started with the rally that happened a few months ago, the march and rally that happened at City Hall. And it's a general listening event around equity, around inclusion, systemic racism in our community, and police use of force. And so our first unity event was on June 25th. Our second session was on July 22nd, and the second one was focused on the youth. And then if you get a chance, mark on your calendars for Monday, August 24th from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. And this event's put on in partnership with the Santa Clara County of LGBTQ Affairs, Silicon Valley Pride, and it is Silicon Valley Pride Month in August. Fabulous Sunnyvale, and of course the city of Sunnyvale. So if you want more information, go to sunnyvale.ca.gov/unity for additional information. And then later this month, the active transportation plan will be approved by council, or at least we'll see it, and I'm assuming it'll be approved in some form. The final draft of the active transportation plan will be brought to City Council at the meeting of Tuesday, August 25th at 7 p.m. And so you can go to the city website and search for ATP, Active Transportation Plan. And this plan basically lays out kind of the long-term vision for biking, for pedestrian mobility throughout our city for the next 10 years. And it gives, certain areas to make sure that slow streets, that people feel safe in adding certain bike routes. This is the ongoing Evelyn Trail that I've talked about previously. It's it's making sure that there's a north and south corridors like the east and west channels. There's a lot of making people feel safe when they're out biking, making people feel safe and having options as far as pedestrians and walkability. So hopefully if you get a chance, definitely take a look at the ATP also. And then, so let's go ahead and get to the county health board and data as we do every week. And it is kind of interesting at the top of that county dashboard is now a disclaimer that due to significant and unresolved problems, the state of California's reporting system for these diseases, has some issues, and we're experiencing significant underreporting of COVID-19 testing results. So that makes sense, from what I've seen. That being said, we're still seeing, an uptick, and whether or not it's the uptick of there were delays in last week's numbers or we're finally getting new numbers is yet to be seen. So the county-wide numbers are now at 11,336. That's up about 1,400 cases from last week compared to 1,300 last week. So it's back to where it was 2 weeks ago. So, and that makes a little more sense. It was 1,400 2 weeks ago, and it's I think it's either surging or at least kind of remaining the same, just from what I hear incidentally. From a San Jose number, they've had 7,494. That's up 1,150 from last week, and so that's definitely a big surge. From 808 the week before, and I think that's the whole thing, is we're seeing some of these numbers kind of level out, that there's been delays in these numbers. From a Sunnyvale standpoint, we've had 519 cases. That's up 49 from last week, and that was only 43 from the previous week. So definitely we've seen a kind of a little bit of there was a dip last week at 43 cases as opposed to 59 the week before. So I think we're starting to see things at least level out, but there's still delays in getting that data. From a hospitalization standpoint, we're remaining about the same, 170, and the death count continues up, 196 deaths in the county, 6 more in the last week, which is down a little bit, but people are still being infected. People are still definitely showing up positive from COVID-19. So do your part to stop the spread, whatever you can do. And from my standpoint, I continue to do a lot of advocating on your behalf, on the city's behalf. On the county level, I continue to work with county health and the county board of supervisors, and it's paid off. About a month and a half ago, we had our first county pop-up van for 3 days at Murphy Park, and it was oversubscribed in a big way. People were standing in line for 2 to 3 hours before getting tested. And so what we have a commitment now is for the next few months, the second and fourth Mondays, we will have the county pop-up testing van come to Sunnyvale. This time it will be by appointment, so there won't be the long waiting in line. The appointment link will be up later today, and they'll be putting that appointment link up about 3 days ahead of the actual date, mainly because if people schedule too far ahead in advance, they end up not showing up, and the county's found that out previously in setting up appointments. So you should be seeing that in your social media later today, either Nextdoor or Facebook, that you'll actually be able to set up an appointment for this coming Monday. And so that'll be the second and fourth Mondays of this month. So that's next week, and then we'll be seeing that at least for the next few months, and then also later this month, El Camino Hospital is committed to doing a pop up for basically frontline workers. So people in the restaurant business, people, city staff that are interfacing with people. So I appreciate that, but that'll be more focused in a little bit more of a limited group of people that can actually set up an appointments for those. And then at a federal level, I've had several calls this week for advocacy. You know, the Senate is currently negotiating the next HEROES Act or the HEALS Act, depending upon which version of the basically next funding, the next version of the CARES Act that will hopefully get approved. And the previous version only basically provided support for cities above 500,000. So it helped San Francisco, it helped San Jose, but in Oakland, but it didn't help a lot of our cities and smaller cities. So I've been talking at the National League of Conference of Mayors and the NLC, and so there's been a lot of an advocacy with our congressmen and congresspeople and our senators, working on a letter to our senators. Our senators are at least on board, as much as I've heard at least, and so I'm positive from that standpoint. But it's hoping that they negotiate something that will help a lot of these smaller cities at the end of the day, which to me is critical. It's making sure that package supports cities like ours, which have spent a lot of money. And we did a lot of our cutbacks from a budgetary standpoint, with the hopes that conceivably backfilling some of the expenses that we've spent, money that we spent due to COVID-19, once the next federal bill gets approved. So we'll see how that goes. I've heard that they were hoping for the end of the week. Now it's continuing on to next week. Not really sure when any of this will get done. So with that, let's go ahead and get to our weekly questions. One question I've gotten is what is happening with the old Macy's parking lot? And I've gotten this from several people. There's fencing, there's trenching going up, and so I talked to the developer. This is continued, remediation. And if you remember, and if you've actually been by that area, you see the big white fenced-in area, and that was remediation for old dry cleaners that used to be downtown. And so many years ago, before the mall went in, when there was still dry cleaners in what was Murphy Avenue, there were leaks in the pipes, and those leaks basically allowed dry cleaning, chemicals to leach into the ground. And part of the remediation of when the new project went in was to make sure that we can do whatever we can to deal with some of those chemicals in the soil. And that's the equipment. What they're basically doing is upgrading that equipment to improve what's being done to try to get out that bad, those bad chemicals as much as possible. So there's a whole water treatment and piping system that goes through that, trying to basically increase the straw that's sucking those bad chemicals out. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I've had a lot of people questioning, and it's actually a good time to some degree because that parking isn't oversubscribed, although a few evenings out of the week I see, a lot of people, overflowing into other areas, but we still have the parking garages, we still have the underground parking, at Plaza del Sol. So that is actually still viable. Another question is what's happening with the Whole Foods. And so that's now moved to October, but the developer is actually, as we get closer and closer to the end line, the chance that it won't happen or that it'll be delayed is less and less. There are a lot of people downtown that are really looking forward to have a Whole Foods downtown. And so that's actually been, very positive. I think that they're almost done with a lot of their interior stuff. So the construction still continues, and there's been a few delays, but from that standpoint, it's actually looking really good. They're definitely, you will be able to get your Thanksgiving turkey if you want to get your turkey from Whole Foods. That will be definitely open by November, is what the developer is currently saying. So I'm looking forward to that. And the Whole Foods is also critical for other retail along McKinley, other restaurants that are looking to open. And you're seeing a lot of development as they're redoing those interiors of those smaller shops underneath Target and along McKinley, underneath the apartments that are there. Another question I got: what's the crane downtown? So the crane that you're seeing is actually to replace some roof equipment for that for those basically retail and restaurants underneath Target. So there needed to be basically better heating and cooling systems, and so whatever was initially evaluated really wasn't up to snuff, and so that crane was putting in new air conditioning, and basically HVAC systems above Target on the roof to make sure that those new restaurants, that new retail had appropriate facilities. So that's actually very positive. Definitely, here's a good question. What's happening with the Sunnyvale elections? So, and people have asked, and I've said in previous meetings that yes, I am running for mayor, and I'm happy to say that I finished all my paperwork and submitted that earlier this week. The county registrar finally went through the signatures, and this is one of the things that we've talked about, that the county registrar still has to have handwritten signatures, and thanks to everyone who signed my nomination papers, but we still needed 20 signatures or 25 signatures, and we end up adding 30 just to make sure you're safe in case there was some mistake or some signature didn't match between the person's signature and what was in the county database. So they still needed that, and I finished my paperwork, and so today is the last day to put in your nomination papers. But so far we have 3 people running for mayor, 3 people running for District 6. Let's go through that. 3 people running for mayor, 3 people running for District 2, which is the downtown district, 2 people running for District 4, which is the district on the east side of Sunnyvale, and then 2 people running for District 4, and then 2 people running for District 6, which is the north side of Sunnyvale. So those nomination papers are in. That we could still get another 1 or 2 people conceivably applying and turning in their nomination papers today, but that's a big thing, and it's going to be an interesting election year with usually how many doors do you knock on, how many people does each candidate actually talk to. It's getting the word out is important, but that's normally the case. Under COVID-19, that won't be the case, and so people have asked what they can do for my campaign. Getting the word out is critical, reminding people and telling people about their Sunnyvale mayor and the job that I've been doing is really important, and so I've already, there's a sign up page that's already there. The mayor's website will be out soon. Getting the word out is critical, so telling your friends and neighbors about their mayor, about all the things that I've been doing, about how I've been helping our residents during office hours, coming up on 4 years of weekly office hours. Setting up the Zoom meeting is important, but you can forward this to your friends and just have people understand that what I've been doing for our city. I think that's one of the most important things. There'll be a new LarryForMayor.com website that's up soon, and I've been doing some final reviews of that. You can donate, you can put up a lawn sign, you can sign up to have that yard sign. All that's important. But and one of the other things I've been already doing is doing neighborhood meet and greets, and that used to be going into someone's home 4 years ago, having coffee, having dessert, and bringing all their neighbors together. Now we're living in the world of Zoom, and so definitely that's something that people can sponsor, and the mayor can come in and talk about, answer whatever questions, much like this is on a weekly basis, whatever your questions are, how people can get more involved, how to in the city or nonprofits. It'd be more of an open dialogue as opposed to these updates. And I answer some of your questions here, of course, but I appreciate all those people that have already said that they're ready to help out. We'll have those lawn signs soon, and getting the word out just in general, forwarding my post to other people, just make sure that, people know what who their mayor is, and what I've already been doing for Sunnyvale. I think that to me is one of the most important things. And so we'll see how the election season going. We're going through endorsement interviews. We're going through candidate forums. So I'll start putting those out, and telling people how you can see, how you can get in contact with the other candidates for the districts, and this will be our first district elections. And then so you'll see different League of Women Voters candidate forums and other candidate forums from different groups. Another question: what's happening with our Sunnyvale reach codes? So I've been pushing on city staff for a long time on this, from a Sunnyvale standpoint, making sure that we update our reach codes, and reach codes are updated every few years. And part of this is to make sure that, I was on the planning commission when our first reach codes were put in place, trying to make development more green, whether or not that's commercial or residential development. And over the last year, there's been, especially Silicon Valley Clean Energy, but other groups have been pushing the counties, the cities in the county, to improve what their minimum standards are for building, and that makes all building more environmental. I've been trying to, and we were close to getting that done, but we needed to do some community outreach, and then COVID happened, and so we finally have gotten through some of that outreach. We have some. The good thing is, going later allows us to copy the great things that some of the other cities have done. So it's basically, stopping the installation of like gas pipelines into homes, that going fully electric. There's new state requirements regarding solar panels. From that standpoint, there's lots of things we can do, increasing the amount of EV chargers on, multifamily developments, making sure that everything is, you have hot water pumps, as well as, hot water electric water pumps and electric heaters, all those sorts of things basically make it better, for the environment, and make it better from a building code standpoint, because as that becomes the norm, it then becomes cheaper for everyone. As we looked at electrification of our water heater, and the big thing is, from that standpoint, it was expensive, and it's getting cheaper every year as it becomes more of a standard. But it's upgrading your electric panel, making sure you're ready, so that when your water heater does fail, that you can go ahead and put in electric water heater. So that's some of the things that these reach codes will be doing. If you want to give feedback, there's 2 online surveys. Those online surveys close on August 10th. So you have until Monday, and I'll make sure to add those to a post or to the chat. Definitely, we want your feedback as far as those reach codes. This is part of our whole climate action playbook. It's part of our CAP Climate Action Plan 2.0. What we can do to make sure that Sunnyvale is more environmentally conscious, is greener, and that goes to the ATP, that goes to reach codes, that goes to so much that happens in our city. And so from that standpoint, hopefully people can get involved. One of the questions I got is what's happening with the Art and Wine Festival. So they finally, and we talked about this probably almost a month ago now, but they did, the Chamber of Commerce did release a, uh, a press release that the Art and Wine Festival is officially canceled for 2020. And just today, I think the Half Moon Bay Pumpkin Festival officially canceled its Art and Wine Festival. Uh, the the State of the City that is normally in September is now going to be fully virtual, and you'll hear more about that later. But because, from a county health standpoint, we're limited to a maximum of 60 people outdoors, and we'll see how National Night Out, which is moved from what would have been this week in August, is now moved to October. We'll see where things stand in October and whether or not people can do a safe distancing, so safe social distancing National Night Out. We'll see how that goes. But how food is distributed, how people, interact, that becomes very important, especially during shelter in place, and making sure that you're not spreading the COVID-19. So, but yeah, the Art and Wine Festival is officially canceled from that standpoint. Let's see, and I've heard a lot of, and there's some questions about Halloween. I've been talking to the city already, and there were several comments at the state level, at the county level, about whether or not what will be happening about Halloween. I'm probably thinking that there won't be door-to-door trick-or-treating. We're trying to see what else we can do from daytime events on the weekend to at least have something. Conceivably, we're still planning for a pet parade, but it has to be limited, and so that becomes an issue also. So, we'll see how things go in the coming few months as far as that's concerned. When do playgrounds reopen? So right now we're talking that over with the county health department. Definitely there's been some discussions from a county health standpoint. Kids conceivably go there, and the problem is, of course, is making sure that kids are following the health rules. And so under a certain age, they wouldn't have masks, but it's making sure that they can conceivably go there, but they're not interacting, and making sure that any parents are there are safe social distancing. So I have been following up with the city on that, and we'll see where things go. We're trying to also deal with the tennis courts and doubles tennis, and I have a clarification out to the county. They've updated their FAQ, and now I'm working with the city to see if we can have doubles tennis approved, but it's either people on the same side of the court are from the same family unit, or all four people are from the same family unit. The problem is, once you allow doubles tennis, the concept that conceivably there are more people interacting, it only becomes worse. From a state standpoint, they say that only singles tennis is allowed, and so there's questions also to the state on whether or not they actually allow doubles tennis. What's the story behind the bad robot on the printer behind you? So this has been, the bad robot. I'll bring the bad robot forward so everybody can see it. The bad robot that sits behind me every week. From that standpoint, so Bad Robot is a production company, and one of the shows that my wife and I used to watch religiously many years ago was Lost. And Bad Robot was the, I think, Damon Lindelof production company, and that has went on to do Star Trek movies and other TV shows. But from that standpoint, it was kind of something that my wife and I enjoyed, and along the way, that was a purchase, a gift, and I think it was a birthday gift to me many years ago. And I thought it's been a nice kind of add on to the back, and I'll actually probably be adding one or two additional items in the background sometime in the future. But it's a nice, it's a nice bad robot, and it's actually kind of unique from that standpoint. I don't think I've ever seen them. I don't even know if they sell them anymore. Education. What's the level of accessibility to hotspots or computers so they can access the internet for children who need them? What is our level of readiness for families in Sunnyvale, and how can we make sure children are online learning along with their peers? And so I've been in contact with the superintendents of all the schools in our school districts in Sunnyvale, and right now, they think that they're ready for the school year as far as having Chromebooks and conceivably Wi-Fi checkouts that are available. And that's one of the things that we've been adding from a library standpoint. We've been looking at you can now check out Chromebooks and hotspots from the library. And one of the things that the Sunnyvale Education Foundation, through funding from Google, is also providing some of that to the school districts. And so that has been a very positive thing from my standpoint. As far as I know, things are okay. That being said, it's like being able to provide, and one of the things that we started last year was a digital divide program funded by the California PUC, and we're actually now, that was initially parents that actually had to go through that program. And once they went through the 8-week program, they got to keep the Chromebook, and then they had basically their Wi-Fi, their cable modem paid for several years. And they better then knew how to administer what their kids are doing online, manage that, monitor that, and just be better for them and the family and the household. That being said, because of social distancing, because of COVID-19, we can't have them all sitting in a room going through these classes. And so we're pivoting that program to provide basically Chromebooks and sign them up and get them online, similarly to what we did before. But now they get it at the beginning of the program and then go through that 8-week program to better understand how to be able to do remote learning for their kids, as well as right now having access to the internet is so critical, whether or not you're doing EDD, whether signing up for job benefits, trying to do job searches, or just getting information. It's so important. But right now, at least from what I hear, we're doing okay. The school districts are ready. They do have Chromebooks for distance learning, and they're working on that issue. Caltrain, does that mean as more trains come through, we'll get even more horns blaring at all times? Is there any way to regulate how loud and long they blare their horns? Well, right now it's all based upon safety. That's one of the reasons why we have basically a project, and that should have been moving forward this summer. We'll see, it's now moved to the fall as our next step. But basically, there's several proposed underground, or basically for Sunnyvale Avenue and for Mary Avenue. So how basically having a grade separation there. So as Caltrain goes through, it wouldn't have to be blaring its horn continuously at each of those intersections. So that will be important, and there's several plans, two designs for both of those intersections. But for now, some of the outreach, much like everything else, has been delayed. But that should have been happening starting up this summer as far as outreach on the two detailed designs. So it was about a year ago that council narrowed down. I think there were 6 or 7 different designs for both of those intersections total, and we narrowed those down to 2. One of them was completely, lowering Caltrain, and but which would have been, I think, over $1 billion. I think it was $1.2 billion to actually lower Caltrain, and it would have required eminent domain for certain land, because you would have had to basically create 2 sets of tracks to move Caltrain while you were trenching. And so there were things that were feasible, but fiscally and economically would never have flown with Sunnyvale residents, and with the city budget, our balanced budget of by charter 10-year balanced budget, 20-year plan. it would have been way too much money to spend, even though conceivably we would have been able to create land because we would have been able to basically trench Caltrain all the way along. You would have had to go down to board the Caltrain, but we would have actually been able to create more parkland, more land where the Caltrain tracks used to be. But that being said, that wasn't feasible, and we narrowed down to two plans, both under the Caltrain tracks, so the Caltrain tracks would remain the same. For the traffic at the Mary intersection, it was kind of two different ways of how you interact with Evelyn, so completely under Evelyn and then looping back, or basically rerouting traffic under Evelyn. And then at the Sunnyvale station, it was either making it for car, pedestrian, and bike, or making it only for pedestrians and bikes, depending upon what the traffic looks like. So that information is supposed to come back to council sometime in the fall. That being said, it was implicit that we would be doing that outreach in the summer. That's of course now moved, so we'll see where a Caltrain grade separation actually is. Oh yeah, so would the Restaurants Act be helpful for Sunnyvale restaurants? Got an email from All Companies DoorDash is alerting me to its existence. Yeah, so there are, and I've had several people talk to me about that. Some of the services are gouging. I haven't heard I've heard, and it's different from city to city and area to area. Some of the cities have actually put in limits on how much the delivery services can charge. I've been talking to the city attorney on that. We'll see where that goes. And it's some of the services are good, some of the services are let's say good citizens, and some of them are not good citizens, and it all cuts into the restaurant bottom line. We'll see what we can do, and legally what makes sense. So in whether or not there's been a lot of pushback from some of these services, and whether or not they would stop serving the area at all. Let's see. It's after 10, so I think it's a good time to wrap up. Thanks again for joining me again this week. As always, I'm proud of Sunnyvale's response to the pandemic. I've seen people really trying to build community and help their community as much as they can when socially distanced. This has become a new normal, at least for a while. Helping your neighbors, making and sharing your face masks, just continuing to build your community, helping others, especially during these critical times, is really important. I get a lot of. I'm really proud. I'm really proud to see Sunnyvale residents pulling together to assist their neighbors. From whatever the issues. Mowing lawns. Sharing food, sharing plants, sharing their tomatoes and their lemons and all that. Making sure that people are connecting, even though they can only connect at a certain distance. So if you're out on a walk, wave, say hello. People miss that interaction, and Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a much stronger community. We're in this together. We will get through this together. Thank you for listening, and until next week, stay safe. Remember to wear your mask. Take care, and I'll talk to you next week. See you. Bye.